Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Thanks again for joining me, Park, on the program.
Hey, Charles, it's great to be back with you here, man. I appreciate it.
Love the story cycle system. It provides a practical framework for everyone to become a better storyteller and build a storytelling organization. And what I'd like to do during this episode is really kind of walk through that framework, going through each step, giving some insight on those steps, and then some illustrations of companies that have used the process. I can even share some of what IMS, my company, has done with the story cycle system to give our listeners a better understanding of how this framework can be used and really how effective it can be. So, if you're ready, let's jump into chapter one. Step one is the backstory. And that's all about explaining where your customers have been, where are they now, and where do they want to go.
Yeah. So let's real quick link that to the hero's journey. And for anybody out there that is not familiar with the hero's journey or the monomyth, but it was this framework to storytelling that this gentleman, Joseph Campbell, identified. And it's been around since the very first story ever told. And it's a circle. You start in your ordinary world with the protagonist, a central character. They get a call to adventure. They go through what he called the extraordinary world, where they have tests and allies, and they have to combat their inner demons and outer obstacles and antagonists. They grow in that process, learn something about themselves, about the world, and then they return home with what Campbell would call the boon, or they've been leveled up personally and therefore level up their family and the communities they serve and so forth. If you think about it, if you compare the Wizard of Oz and the very first Star Wars movie, they're essentially the same story. And both of them follow the hero's journey precisely, step by step. Here's the interesting thing about it: George Lucas, when he wrote Star Wars, had been a practitioner and studier of Joseph Campbell, and he wrote the script for his senior thesis at USC based on the hero's journey to see if it really worked like Campbell said it would. And well, we know what the history is to that. But here's the most interesting thing about those two movies: the Wizard of Oz came out, nobody even knew of the hero's journey. Campbell hadn't been around, he hadn't been talking about it, he hadn't been showing how it worked, and yet that story follows the precise template. So it's a template that's ingrained in our Homo sapiens storytelling monkey brain because we all experience this hero's journey in our life in small ways and in very large journeys. It's very meta in that respect. So when I saw that, I mapped it to business because I thought, well, most business people won't buy into the woo woo part of Hollywood. So, how could I take those same progressions, since it's a template to storytelling, and use it in business? The 10-step story cycle system does that. And to your first question, step number one, the backstory. So, we've got to set the scene for your brand story, your leadership story, whatever your L&D training story. So, in doing so, you want to think about your audience when you're doing this. Where have they been relative to your offering? Where are they now relative to your offering? And how can you level them up? And where will it take them? I want you to be thinking about that in tandem at the same time. Ask the same questions of yourself. Where have you and or your brand been? Where are you and your brand now? And where are you and your brand going? You end up with kind of two stories that are going to merge a little bit further in the story cycle system because that's the goal of it. You want to get your audience to buy into and become a part of your story by helping them get what they want on their journey. Does that make sense?
It makes a whole lot of sense. And thanks for clarifying how it connects into that monomyth, the hero's journey. And you're right, not only in movies and books, for centuries, the hero's myth is captivated. I mean, if you go back in literature, so this is such a pervasive tale or a pattern, a structure to tell stories that it's very effective. And we've used it throughout our society and we'll continue to use it. And you're right. I mean, those two movies are great examples of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey approach, but it really came out prior to him even. And that backstory, right? Setting the stage because you got to get to care about the characters, right? If you go back to the Wizard of Oz, you have to learn about Dorothy, about her backstory for you to care about her before she goes on that adventure, that journey. And the same with Luke Skywalker. The story wouldn't be as effective, wouldn't connect at an emotional level if you really didn't care about the character and learn who they are.
That's exactly right, and when you're doing this, when you're using this system, this process, you always wanna be thinking from your audience's point of view. First and foremost, where are they on their hero's journey as it relates to whatever it is you have to sell to them to get them to buy in? It could be a product, a service, a training, a vision, a mission, or whatever. So you want to really appreciate where they are on their journey because you want to connect with them as their mentor or guide, which we will talk about a little bit later. What's interesting to me about this is the major paradigm shift that has to take place in most communicators, most marketers' minds is you are not the center of the story. Your audience is always the center of the story. You simply play that more important role of mentor or guide to help them get what they want out of their life. But to really understand that and appreciate it in that first step, the backstory, where have they been? Where are they now? And where are they going that you can help them get there?
Right. Absolutely. Spending time on that is critical before you move into the next step, which is really talking about the audience, which, like you mentioned, they are the heroes of your story. You are not the hero. You're the guide or the mentor helping them along. And like you said, that's a paradigm shift for a lot of organizations and leaders to make, to realize they don't, customers don't want to hear or see the chest pounding. How great am I? It's great that you'd come to us. We're so great. We're talking about all of our features or benefits when you really should be focused on their problems and how you can help them solve that problem.
What's in it for them? And that's what that backstory helps you do. It helps you kind of make an assessment both for you and your brand and organization, and then more importantly for your audience, because you'll help them get what they want. In return, they're going to help you grow and get what you want. So that does then lead into step two, and it's called hero for a reason. I want you to identify your number one audience. And in this exercise, I ask people to, if say you're doing a branding program, I want to know who are your top three audiences. And invariably, I'm going to hear, well, we're so good, anybody can use this. And we go, yeah, 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 whatever. You won't appeal to anybody if you're trying to appeal to everybody. So I want to know that old Pareto principle, who makes up 80% of your revenue? Put them right up top there and be as specific as you possibly can, and then prioritize the next two audiences. I'm always interested, especially when working with a larger brand, is if they will ever prioritize their internal audiences of their colleagues. The very astute ones do, because they know they've got to get their colleagues to buy into their story if they're going to be effective. But a lot of times it'll all be external customers that they're focusing on. But I want you to prioritize the top three, and then I want you to focus on the very number one audience in this process.
That's so true and so critical that many people will not do that initially unless prompted to do so because they think that their customer is external. But unless their company, their employees are bought in to the story as well, it's not going to be very successful. And I love how you state also in your book during this step is that the best product doesn't win. So just to further encourage this paradigm shift, it's the best story that wins, that frames the problem in a particular way that opens up people to a new kind of solution. And that's what category designers do. I love the book that you mentioned in your one of your podcasts, Play Bigger, where you kind of look at category design and how that really connects and relates to this story cycle process.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of step one and step two working well together. I was working with a very large pharmaceutical drugstore company. There's only a couple of them. You can probably guess maybe which one it was. And I was an advisor on their sustainability committee and how to communicate it. And I was out in Chicago working with them. This is pre-pandemic. And I was listening to a presentation from their HR department, and they were talking about the backstory. This large, large conglomerate, a drugstore chain, and why sustainability was so important to them to help also coach their customers in the process, and how if they did it well, it would help separate them from their competition. That's the backstory. Then I heard them go on to say, but we have found that there is some confusion internally that we're doing all of these amazing good deeds in sustainability, and we're actually capturing them in video and telling these stories and whatever, but nobody internally knows about it. We're telling the external market all about it, but a lot of people are scratching their heads like, really? I work here and I didn't know that? So the backstory is big chain. They want to implement sustainability. They're doing a good job with it to differentiate themselves from the competition. That same meeting, right after HR stood in, then the head of communications comes in and wanted to roll out their communications plan. They did so. And when they prioritized their audiences, number 7 on that priority list were colleagues. So I raised my hand. I said, "You've given us 7 different audiences that you're trying to communicate there. Numbers are these in priority order?" And they looked at them. They said, "Well, yes, I guess they are." And then I said, "Well, why is your colleagues the number 7th in that priority when we just heard from HR that they have no idea what's going on here?" I would recommend in this particular hero's journey, let's put them at the very top of the list. Let's make sure that they all understand what this company is doing and how the great impact you're having socially and on the environment out there. And then as you roll it out externally, you are going to have more spokespeople for you for free word of mouth marketing. So that's an example of a brand saying, okay, here's my backstory of what we're trying to do. And then just being off kilter on who their number one audience was in this particular instance, it wasn't the customer. It was your number one audience being the colleague at this phase of their rolling out of their sustainability initiative. So that's something that really helps in the story cycle system to get people super clarified on who are you talking to and why should they care?
That's a great summary of the first two steps. Now, step three is the stakes. What's at stake? This is where you clarify your audience. You are trying to connect with them on a deeper level through understanding and empathy. And if you could provide some more insight there, because you're really taking those audiences that you've already identified and really getting to know them and connect with them in a deeper way.
Yeah, it's stakes. So you got to raise the stakes in every show. I mean, any story you hear, you get introduced to the character, to the setting. What is it that they want in the world, and why is that important to them? So, what is at stake for your audience? And this goes back to that whole idea, Charles, that you really have to take the time to understand your audience and what's in it for them and what's at stake for them. In this particular section, in step 3 of stakes, I like you to consider two different things about your audience. Number one, what do they wish for? And by wish, I mean emotionally. What do they do? They wish to look prettier, be happier, sound more confident. What is that emotional wish that is going to win the day when you deliver on that? Because that's really what you're selling to. People are going to buy for that emotional wish. And then I want you to think about the want. So while the wish is emotional, the want is physical. What do they want to buy or buy into in order to fulfill that wish? I like to think that every brand is really in the wish granting business. So, IMS, for instance, why do people take your courses? What do they wish to get out of it emotionally?
Well, we've identified several things. I mean, they want that confidence, enthusiasm, empowerment, want to feel good about themselves, their abilities, and being able to use that in a meaningful way to make their life easier, to make their managerial role, leadership role easier in some way. And through IMS, we've identified really 4 to 5 different audiences. And like what you stated before, we were not even considering the internal audience until you had stated that to us to say, don't forget about them as well, right? Because we want the primary user to feel that joy and happiness. We don't want them to feel uncertainty, doubt, or fear. And we want that internal audience to really have enthusiasm and confidence as well. And in the product they're selling, and a strong belief around the fact that it can really change leaders' lives with the soft skill development that we offer.
Yeah, so that wish is, let's go from the user standpoint. Someone's going to come in and invest their time and their energy and their money into an IMS program. They wish to feel more confident. Let's just go with that one emotion. I just want more confidence. I'm really good at what I do, Charles, but I'm not very confident speaking to my leadership on it. Do you have training that would give me that confidence? So they want the emotional, fulfill that wish emotionally of building their confidence through what? Through curated training, through what's the physical mechanism that they are going to use. It's the curated training that you all provide in order to fulfill that wish. Now, why this is important is we often forget about the emotional side. I mean, we default to just the pragmatic features, functions, bomb, 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 and we hit people over the head with it, do that chest pounding. Like we've got the most amazing widget, the most amazing SaaS platform, the most amazing curated content, when that's just simply the vehicle in order to help our audience fulfill that wish. And think about any movie you've ever watched. It's always about fulfilling that internal, taking on the internal demons and fulfilling and building out that protagonist, that hero on their journey. And if you think about it, in all the books you read about the hero's journey, it's simply a metaphor for taking on what's going on between our ears. We're no good. We're not fast enough. We're not strong enough. I wish I could be more confident. I wish I could be more enthusiastic or whatever. Then you have to go on a physical journey to level you up, and you then gain that confidence. You said, I've returned with the boon. I'm better at this because of what I did. So that's the wish for and want is so important in that third step.
And these first three steps, do you find a lot of companies or leaders kind of try to hurry through those to get to the call to adventure, to get to where they really feel like there's some value and people don't spend enough time in this backstory part of the hero's journey?
Yeah, you really have to do soul searching and just take the time. Give yourself some time and have some patience to do this. Ask the hard questions of yourself, of your customers, and of those outside looking in to really see if you can't get a good sense of the setting for your story. What is it you do differently and more distinctively than anybody in your world? Backstory. Who do you serve? That number one audience. And by the way, when you're done with this, you'll come back to audience 2 and 3 and be able to very quickly fill it out because you focused on that one audience at the time. And what is it that they really wish for and want? And get super clear on that because then it starts playing out. That is the foundation for everything to come in the story cycle system.
And it makes for a much more compelling story because now with step four, that's the disruption phase, right? The call to adventure where you declare your unique value proposition to hopefully create some brand distinction.
Absolutely. So if you are in status quo, if you're like sitting back, fat and happy, you probably are not going to do anything. I mean, that's just like survival mode, status quo. I'm just going to hang out here. If, on the other hand, you are trying to get someone to buy in to something you have, a product, a service, a training, or whatever it is, you have got to create what Hollywood calls an inciting incident. And the Wizard of Oz, the inciting incident was that tornado that came in that propelled the story forward. Without the tornado moving her off into Oz, you don't have a story. In Star Wars, Luke losing his aunt and uncle when they got murdered on Tatooine propelled him on his speeder forward to where? To Mos Eisley, that crazy little version of Oz on Tatooine of all those different space creatures. My point here is that if you are going to get your audiences to move and to buy into something, you have to shake them out of status quo. Now, they might have been shaken out on their own by earthly events, by the universe, by the recession, by COVID or whatever, and all of a sudden have turned their world upside down like it does in the hero's journey. Or maybe you need to shake them out of status quo because they don't realize by their inaction what they're losing out in life. So, this step four is when that call to adventure comes in. This is where you start positioning yourself as their mentor or guide to help them get what they want. And you do that by creating that unique value proposition that is based on step one, your backstory. What do you do differently in the market than anybody else? Two, who are you for? Three, what's at stake for them? What do they wish for and want? Therefore, in step number four, here's your unique value proposition. The first one that pops to mind, no big surprise, is my own for the business of story. And my unique value proposition, you said earlier, is learn how to excel through the stories you tell. And then I can back it up into the other three steps of who that's for and whatever. But just for the pace of this interview, what I want your people to do, your audience to do, and listening to this is just do those first three steps. And then in step four, write down what that one little tagline, that catchphrase, that unique value proposition is that quickly communicates how you are different and more distinctive than anybody else and what the outcome you can get from it is.
Well, and in a previous interview, we covered this framework, and the unique value proposition is really compelling when you can put it in a narrative framework such as the ABT. So perhaps you can unpack that just a little bit for our listeners. They can also listen to our previous episode that really covers that in more depth. But I think at this point, right, it'd be helpful really for them to try to use that framework. Simple to explain, difficult to use, though.
Yeah, the and, but, therefore, I learned it almost 10 years after I learned about the hero's journey. And the thing about the hero's journey and my then story cycle system is it can be complicated. It takes some thinking, it takes some effort to get through. I learned about the and, but, therefore from my good friend Dr. Randy Olson, Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist turned USC film school graduate, and he learned about it in his studies. And it's and, but, therefore it is, think of the hero's journey of this big long narrative spiral. It is broken up into an and, act one, with a statement of agreement, setting the stage. But here's the journey, here's the car chase, here's the explosions, but here's everything we have to go through to the therefore. Here's how we return home with the boom. So you're exactly right. I really ask people to use the ABT throughout as they're capturing their thoughts and writing it down. But an ABT is a great way to start perfecting your pitch. So, for instance, again, business of story, because it's top of mind with me. My and but therefore would be something like, as a professional, whatever, marketer, communicator, content creator, as a business leader, you want to connect deeply and move your audiences to action, move your colleagues to action, right? That's your and statement of agreement, but you're not connecting. That's the problem. Here's the plot twist, but you're not connecting because you haven't learned how to effectively tell a story. Therefore, starting with the and, but, therefore, began understanding the narrative constructs of setup, problem resolution in a singular narrative framework. I'm just vamping now at this point, but it's a great way to still like write that out and then from that distill what your unique value proposition is. Give you a real quick example. There is a car dealership, a used car dealership in Quebec, Canada, called Pret Auto Partes, and I just totally butchered that in French. That means ready car go. It's a company that precisely works with Canadians whose credit was destroyed because of the global recession back in the day, or maybe they lost it because of money due to health reasons or a divorce. These are good people whose financial background got blown up on them. Well, Andre Martin Hobbs started this used car company, which you would normally equate to being sharks for the subprime buyer. And he goes, no, we're using it to help them get back on their feet. They come in, they buy a car that's right for them. We put them through a financial planning program, and then we make sure they make their payments every month for 2 years to help repair their credit. So it sounds something, their ABT to build out their UVP might sound something like, you want the freedom and dignity of owning your own car because that's what their customers told them. You want the freedom and dignity of owning your own car, but you have lousy credit. Therefore, Prate Auto Partes will put you in a car you can afford and get you back on the road to financial freedom. So that's their very lyrical ABT to set them up how they're different than everybody else. It all boils down to their unique value proposition, which became Freight Auto Partes, your vehicle to financial freedom. Now, they were hoping to grow. This was back in 2010. Yeah, no, 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 no. Let me take that back. This was back in 2015. I helped them build out that story. They grew by 400% and became the largest auto dealer in Quebec, Canada, and now are actually franchising their model throughout North America because they knew who they were servicing, the disenfranchised subprime Canadian buyer. They weren't just going to sell them a bill of goods, they were going to help them repair their credit with the proper purchase of the right car and then be there to help them through the 2 years of paying that off so that they could repair their credit and buy the car that they actually want and have a little money in the bank afterwards. Beautiful UVP, your vehicle to financial freedom.
Great story. Love the ABT framework. It's everywhere, like you mentioned in your book and from our past conversations. The Gettysburg Address by Lincoln is set up that way. A lot of famous songs are set up that way. So once you know this framework, it's hard not to see it in society, in nearly everywhere you go. And it's really finding the hurt, amplifying the pain, and then healing the wound, right?
You've been reading my books. Thank you for that, Charles.
Appreciate it. It's a very effective framework. Like I said before, it's simple to explain, like Park just did. More difficult to put into practice. You need to practice with it. But over time, I've certainly gotten better with it and really have seen the effects of it. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.